Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com. William Pitt was the first Prime Minister of the United Kingdom in the early 19th century. He said, "Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It's the argument of tyrants, it's the creed of slaves." Now in June of 2022, the world is facing a catastrophe from a global food shortage. But Holland is shutting down their farms and the farmers are angry. Holland closes dozens of farms and cattle ranches to reduce nitrogen by 30%. The Dutch government plans to cut greenhouse gas nitrogen by as much as 70%. And the Prime Minister says, "There's no choice, we have to bring down nitrogen emissions." He says he's doing this out of necessity, which is exactly what William Pitt warned us about. The Prime Minister is scientifically illiterate. Nitrogen is not a greenhouse gas. He's probably referring to nitrous oxide, which is a very minor greenhouse gas in Earth's atmosphere. Nitrous oxide makes up about 1 part per 3 million of Earth's atmosphere. To put this in perspective, if everyone in Kansas represented 1 molecule of Earth's atmosphere, odds are nobody in Kansas would represent a nitrous oxide molecule. There is very little nitrous oxide in Earth's atmosphere, and it's increasing very slowly. The concentration is increasing about 1 part per billion per year, which means it'll take more than 300 years for the concentration of nitrous oxide to double. Now let's look at the impact of a doubling of nitrous oxide over the next 300 years. In 2009, I was doing software development for the National Center for Atmospheric Research. They hired me to look for ways to accelerate their radiative transfer model, which is their greenhouse effect model. So I'm very familiar with how the greenhouse effect is calculated in climate and weather models. I generated this graph from the radiative transfer model used by the National Center for Atmospheric Research. And I used the mid-latitude summer model, which would represent Holland right now. Going from left to right across the x-axis, I show increasing amounts of greenhouse gases. And up the y-axis, I'm showing downwelling long-wave radiation, which is the greenhouse effect. This is where we're at now. 200% would represent a doubling. I plotted lines for 4 different greenhouse gases: water vapor, carbon dioxide, nitrous oxide, and methane. As you can see from this graph, there's only 2 significant greenhouse gases on Earth. One is water vapor and the other is carbon dioxide. Water vapor is far and away the most important greenhouse gas on Earth, and carbon dioxide lags far behind. Nitrous oxide and methane are very close to being irrelevant. Even huge changes in their concentration will have very little impact on the greenhouse effect. A doubling of nitrous oxide, which will require about 300 years, would only increase the greenhouse effect by about 0.1%. And Holland's contribution to this is so small it wouldn't even be measurable. Yet the Dutch government has set a completely meaningless and arbitrary goal for reducing nitrogen. The Prime Minister is scientifically illiterate and he's talking complete gibberish. His actions are further reducing the critically short food supply. So let's take a look at who's behind filling his head with nonsense. On Valentine's Day last year, when many people in Texas were freezing to death due to the extreme cold, Bill Gates said the world needed to destroy the beef industry in order to stop global warming. It's not surprising that Bill Gates is doing this because he and Jeff Bezos are heavily invested in the fake meat industry. They have huge amounts of money to gain by destroying the beef and cattle industries around the world. During the COVID-19 lockdowns, when almost everyone else in the world was getting very poor, Bezos and Gates made huge amounts of money. Bezos' wealth increased by 2/3 and Gates' wealth increased by 1/3. These two profit from human misery. This is horrific behavior and a horrific conflict of interest. So why isn't the press calling them out? The reason is because Bill Gates also owns the press. He's given almost $25 million to National Public Radio to push his propaganda. And that's exactly what National Public Radio does. They push Bill Gates' propaganda. They're his marketing and sales department. But why is the Dutch Prime Minister hurting his own people and further reducing the food supply during a time of crisis? And that takes us back to where we started with William Pitt. Necessity is the plea for every infringement of human freedom. It's the argument of tyrants, and it's the creed of slaves. The enslavement of the public has been accomplished through their addiction to mass media. Globalists control the mass media, and people dutifully listen to their propaganda day in and day out, year after year. Toto's family got rid of their television almost 30 years ago. Toto is a very smart dog, and he has no interest in being brainwashed. You can visit him, Kyrie Caesar, Upal and Toki on the web at realclimatescience.com.